why do we have a drive to protect raptors? You could say it in one word: cool. Raptors are absolutely amazing. I've been drawn to them since I first got exposed to them, and oftentimes I have to step back and remind myself how amazing it is to be able to work with them. One of the most disturbing events I had is I had a falconer who lost a peregrine falcon. When it landed on a pole, it had both of its legs blown off. Absolutely horrific. Ultimately, I started realizing it was not uncommon to find birds that had been electrocuted. What I wanted to do was be able to go to a client and say, this is how you could fix it. I became interested in this in the early 80s. And I had gone up to Montana to follow a girl who was going to school up there. I ended up working for a consulting firm, and that consulting firm built power lines. I started becoming involved in actually designing distribution power lines and oftentimes doing rebuilds. And that's when I first noticed carcasses at the base of poles. What that did is it really got me curious about the configurations that were the most problematic on the landscape.
As soon as people started putting wires up in the air, birds started dying from either collisions or electrocutions with those wires. Avian electrocutions began to be noticed in the mid-1970s in the western U.S. when investigations of shootings of golden eagles were taking place. People were shooting eagles off of power poles, and so the criminal investigation of those shootings led to the discovery that many of the carcasses were not shot, they had been electrocuted.
That got a lot of people involved, conservationists involved, Fish and Wildlife Service, groups like Audubon. And in the midst of all this, we have sort of a keystone study that was done by Pat Benson. He really laid the foundation for us to be able to understand, what made a power line a greater risk from a biological side of it.
I think we have to remember when we're thinking about why raptors might get electrocuted is how they're living their lives. And these structures, distribution poles, for example, that are out there to serve human needs, also serve a biological need. That might be the single most advantageous perch within miles. And it actually might make the difference between living and dying. So given the fact that we're putting these structures out there, I think we have to expect that they're going to get used by the birds in a way that supports their lives.
The birds often don't recognize that the power pole can become an ecological trap because a big part of electrocution is the size of a bird.
Their wingspan is so large, their bodies are tall enough and wide enough to reach two different parts of a power line. So whether that's two parts of electrified or an electrified and a grounded part, completing that electrical circuit.
It doesn't need to be that way. So better construction practices, avian-friendly construction standards, that can allow avian-friendly construction where we're never going to have to worry about that pole.
By this point, I had left the company I was with in Montana, and I came to a consulting firm in Fort Collins, Colorado. And there was one day where I just said, I'm going to go back to grad school, and I'm going to study this issue much like Pat Benson did, but whereas he was really focused on the more of the biological side of it, I was more interested in looking at it from the engineering side of it. What configurations were the most problematic? How often did they occur on the landscape? What things were being done? Was it working or not working? Ultimately, what we discovered was that the more complicated the poles were on the landscape, that generally the greater the risk was. So something like a recloser was just off the charts in being problematic. We were able to go to utility companies and say, hey, if you're only going to fix one thing on your system, go get after those reclosers because you're going to prevent a bird death or an injury, and the injuries can be absolutely horrific.
One of the acts that protects almost all birds in North America is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and it was enacted specifically to reduce take of birds for their feathers.
Really, the driver for that was the millinery trade. People wanted fancy hats with crazy bird feathers on them. Conservation at a state level wasn't going to do the trick, and what the legislators decided to do was create an actual treaty.
Those laws are really important to help guide private companies and agencies in managing and protecting bird species across the country.
The big game changer was the Moon Lake prosecution. In the late 80s, the Fish and Wildlife Service decided to prosecute a utility for electrocuting birds of prey. And you had a lot of utilities then that were, suddenly realizing that there could be some legal liability with this.
From the first time I met Rick, I felt like there was a kindred spirit.
When I met with Andy, he was very interested in what I was doing with the raptor electrocution work, and particularly he could see the tie-in to the reliability issue.
There's only so much we can do to really impact reliability, and addressing the issues with raptor interaction is one of the things that we can do.
And the very first project we landed was with Moon Lake. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Moon Lake felt like I was the right person to be a liaison between those two groups because it was pretty contentious at that point. I can remember back then telling my wife, I said, well, this is like one of the most amazing projects I've ever been involved with, and it's too bad that it's just going to be a one-off. It caused people to reassess what their programs were, and in many cases to initiate programs where none existed before. All of the co-ops in Colorado decided to band together and to do a holistic avian protection plan. Public Service of Colorado said, yeah, we want to join that effort as well, as did several cities up and down the Front Range. Colorado Springs, we had the city of Longmont. They joined that same effort, as did the United States Air Force Academy. We just saw this huge upswelling of utilities jumping on board. Now it's been 22 years later, and we're doing work all around the world. We've done over 120 avian protection plans now. This week I'm reviewing power lines in India and Bhutan. We're doing projects in Hawaii where we're providing avian collision avoidance systems, and meanwhile still addressing electrocution and collision issues for all of our clients. The thing I'm the most proud of is that we've built a really good reputation of folding science into everything that we do. We are prolific in publishing papers, and we feel that by doing that, it's going to be useful to others that follow behind us.
We've made a lot of progress as an industry. Construction standards are increasingly raptor friendly, but we got a long way to go.
As we see the world becoming electrified, we're seeing a lot of those same mistakes being made. Companies that are building these lines want to do it in the cheapest way, and it turns every pole into a killer. They should take a longer view of what it is that they're doing. They should build the lines in a way that are not going to be creating killing fields for raptors. And as we're finding out now, anytime an animal gets into the grid and it gets shocked or electrocuted, it is a thermal event.
Every time that happens, it's a little bit of the roll of the dice. A bird could hit the ground and spark some grass. As companies start to appreciate this, the ones who are operating in high fire environments are really going to need to reckon with the exposure.
one of the great privileges I feel like we have while we walk this earth is to be stewards of the environment.
We have to recognize that our footprint is more than just where our house is.
We're just part of kind of that web of life moving all around us, and I think a lot of people don't notice it, but it is here. And it is pretty amazing.